And now, from the great state of Mississauga in Ontario, Canada, it's the Ted Woloshyn Podcast. Brought to you by ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. ETP Canada. And Tom's Place, for the finest in men's fashion. Tom's Place will suit you. And now, here's Ted.
Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Ted Woloshyn Podcast. Thanks very much for taking the time to spend with us. Joining me this week, longtime friend and colleague, legendary radio broadcaster, Gene Valaitis. Now, this is a guy who has done everything that can be done behind a microphone. He's best known for his work as not only a newscaster, but also a host and co-host of many a morning show. Probably best known for his work with Jesse. The Gene and Jesse podcast, by the way, which features all of the great works that they've done over the years, is available. We'll talk to him a little bit about that. We're also going to talk to him about work that he's doing with a fabulous organization called Repeat Champions Foundation. So stick around for that as well. Eugene, how are you?
Ted Woloshyn, Tedski, as I love to refer to you. I'm really good. I'm great. Nice to be on your podcast here.
It's a pleasure having you on. I was thinking back the other day, you and I first met, I guess it would probably have been late 70s. Would have been late 70s? I guess it would have been, right? Early 80s, something like that? Somewhere in there. I don't know. It's all a big blur to me anyway. But back at a time when you and I had this discussion one time years ago, because you having an ethnic name, me having an ethnic name. When I first started in radio, I was Ted Walker. I wasn't Ted Woloshyn because Woloshyn, it was thought that the average person couldn't pronounce or spell or understand what that word meant, which is really silly thinking back then. But did you run into those kinds of problems with a name like Valaitis as well when you first started?
No, interestingly enough, I didn't. And I got my first radio job. It was very interesting. I was attending Ryerson, the Bachelor of Arts program of Radio and TV Arts. Now they call Ryerson something else, the woke generation. And, I had written letters back in the day that we were doing that. And that was my second year in 1976. And I had written letters to all the radio stations in town saying, can I come and work at your radio station for free? And I got rejected by every one of them. And back then in 1976, after CFRB, the biggest radio station in Toronto was Chum AM.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I just figured I would try a different approach. And on a weekday at about noon hour, I wandered into the Chum building, which used to be at 1331 Yonge Street. Mm-hmm. And I told the receptionist and switchboard operator, they had something that looked like a big switchboard. I said, I have an appointment to see Dick Smythe, the legendary late great Dick Smythe. And she said, well, he's out at lunch, so just have a seat in the lobby. So back in the late 70s, the 3 martini lunch was still alive and well, and people would get they get a bit of a glow on during lunch.
Yeah.
So in walks Dick Smythe, a guy who I've grown up listening to, and he's got the red cheeks happening. And the woman said, this young man over here has an appointment to see you. Yeah, geez, I don't remember any appointment. Come on in anyway. Sit down. So we started talking, and I had a reel-to-reel tape of a short documentary that I did, and he listened to a little bit of it. And he said, we could use some, we could use some guy like you in the newsroom over there, we'll pay you $4.25 an hour. Now you say you're still in school. I said, yeah. He goes, well, I'm going to need you overnight. How are you going to figure that one out? I said, I will figure it out. And literally for the next 2 years, I basically lived in Chum Radio. I slept in the lobby on the couch, the same couch I was sitting there waiting for Smythe and the appointment on numerous nights. And I would prepare the overnight news, and then I would prepare the 5 a.m. news for Dick Smythe to read. Like, he would arrive at like 10 to 5, and he would read my newscast. And then after he did his 8 o'clock newscast, we would go to Seniors, a restaurant in the Yonge and St. Clair area.
There, many times.
He would have his pencil, and he would go through the script that I wrote. And that's how I learned news writing from Dick Smythe. And then at 8:30 in the morning, I would go to school. And I was exhausted for 2 years.
I don't know how you managed.
But then he started giving me a chance to go on the air. And at 19 years old, I started doing the Sunday morning news on Chum FM. And nothing was ever said about my name. Now, years later, I got a job in Winnipeg at CFRW and Q94, and you would figure a last name like Valaitis in Winnipeg would just be like, hey, one of us, right? Ethnic name. But everybody had a jingle package, and they only had one jingle package left. So I became, the only time I had to change my name, I became J. Bishop. J Bishop 13 CFRW, dun 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 dun, the big jingle package. And the thing that was hysterical about it was I'd walk through the halls and somebody go, hey, Jay. And I just keep walking. And, this one guy said to me, he goes, people think you're kind of stuck up. I said, why? He goes, well, they, call your name out in the hall. You don't even acknowledge it. I said, oh, geez. I said, well, Jay Bishop isn't my real name. I said, so if you say Jay to me, I don't respond. So that was an interesting joke and win. But yeah, that was the only time I've always used Valaitis otherwise. And I think it's to my advantage because to this day, I lived in the States for 11 years and worked there. And when I would be coming in before I got my Nexus pass, I'd give the border person my passport and, they'd be looking at it. And on at least 40 or 50% of the occasions, the guy'd look up, so what happened to Jesse and Gene? I go, you remember me. So yeah, interesting name story.
One of the greatest names in radio is a guy who worked in Toronto for a while, known mostly for his great work in the States, was John Records Landecker. And I met him one time, and I said, because he used to always say, my name, it's John Records Landecker. Yes, Records truly is my middle name. So I met him one time at some function, and I said, is Records really your middle name? And he pulls out his driver's license, John Records Landecker. He took the middle name Records, was given the middle name Records. That was his mother's maiden name. So he was John Records Landecker. That was actually his official real name.
Yeah, well, it's the same with me. And my middle name is King. And at one of my jobs, because that was my mother's maiden name, and at one of the jobs, when a program director found out that my middle name was King, he said, why don't you just call yourself King Valaitis? I said, no, that's not going to work.
No, it sounds like you're actually royalty from somewhere out in Scandinavia or somewhere, right?
Some Lithuanian royal family.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I want to talk to you about a number of things here, but I want to talk to you about a charity that you're involved with, which I think is one of the most creative, fascinating charitable organizations that I've stumbled across in years, and it's called Repeat Champions Foundation. When I first saw this, and you're the director of philanthropy and gifts, and I thought, what is this Repeat Champions Foundation? And I'm trying to figure out, what does it mean? Does it mean like people who've won and then they fall in hard times and they come back? Of course, that has nothing to do with what I thought it has to do. It has everything to do with trophies. Explain this concept because it's fascinating.
Well, the guy who founded it, his name is Sereno Genovese, not part of the Genovese crime family, by the way.
Sure.
And, but, Hamilton has a huge Italian population, so that's where he's from. And he has a cottage about an hour away from Hamilton. And most people who own a simple cottage will understand this. At the end of the weekend, you get your garbage and you take it to the local garbage dump because there isn't trash pickup. So he was at the local garbage dump with his son, and there was a woman there who was throwing away 3 trophies. And so they would have gone into the landfill site, never to be seen again. And he said, what do you, and she said, well, I don't want these trophies anymore. And he asked if he could have them. And she said, yes. So he had been coaching soccer and basketball in the Hamilton area for years. And he knew the importance of trophies. So what he did was he took them home and he polished them up and cleaned them up and made them look brand new again. And he knew another gentleman who was coaching girls soccer. And the women or the young girls who belonged to this team came from like a low income area of Hamilton, and they could barely afford, soccer balls and running shoes, let alone giving out trophies at the end of the season.
Right.
So, he cleaned up these trophies and he donated them to this club. And the winning team got a number of trophies because he started collecting them. And he could not believe the smiles on their faces. So it keeps trophies out of landfill sites. Really is. It's truly recycling. And
Yeah.
then somebody, there was an original trophy, an original champion for that trophy. So now what happens is out of the landfill, completely refurbished, so recycled, and we have a brand new repeat champion. So we've done thousands and thousands of trophies. In Southern Ontario, there's a program where students can get credit for doing work in the community. So we have a few boards of education where they have approved us. So we have what are called Super Saturdays twice a month. And we get all these high school students. They come in from 9 o'clock till 4. We feed them lots and lots of pizza and good food and drinks and stuff. And they refurbish the trophies for us and put the repeat champion label on the trophies. The website is repeatchampions.ca if you want to go. And we hand these out. And now we have such a great request. We're going to big corporations, and we're a registered nonprofit with the CRA. So if you donate money to us, we give you a tax receipt. And just like if you're donating to a Goodwill or any charity like that, you get the same tax deductible receipt. And we have people from all over the world now requesting trophies. So we really do need extra funding because we really want to take this to the next level. I work pro bono, by the way. Everybody works pro bono. And
Well, good
it's
for you.
just, we still can't get over the popularity of this. And I've never met one person who doesn't get really excited and say, wow, this is a great idea.
It is. Because I think about it over the years. If you've ever competed in sports as a young kid or as an older adult, you played like golf, and golf tournaments are always handing out trophies for longest drive and closest to the pin. And after a while, they just start accumulating, and all they're doing is collecting dust. And really, it's like, unless it's something really, really special, you really don't want to hang on to it, and you really don't hang on to it. And I suggest that people go to the website and find and watch the whole process where they take these trophies and then they strip off the little plaque on them and they clean it off, and then they put on a new sticker and they put on the Repeat Champions Foundation. And you're right, it is the only real true recycling that I can think of off the top of my head, because I know that when I take my empty pop cans and cans of baked beans and throw them in the blue box, I know only a small percentage of those are actually being recycled, and the rest of them are being hidden in plants and warehouses, and or just thrown into landfills. But this is actual recycling and putting smiles on a lot of kids' faces. Great
Yeah,
idea.
we took 400 trophies down to Ottawa a couple of weekends ago and handed them all out to every kid on these various teams got a trophy. Some are small, some are big. Like they're not all the same. But seeing an 8-year-old kid playing a sport and getting a trophy coming from a low income family or a low income area, I mean, just the look on their face, it's just it really it's truly incredible. And and it's good for Mother Earth as well. So I hate to use cliches, but it truly is a win-win situation for everybody.
It is. You mentioned Jesse there. You mentioned Gene and Jesse, and the podcast exists. And the podcast is one of those unique podcasts because you guys were smart enough to hold on to the stuff that you did on the radio, and then you had to digitize. It is amazing, and I've worked at some great radio stations over the years, and come time for them to look back on one of their announcers or one of their news people, they want to do tribute to them because they passed. They go, "Oh, we didn't save any of that tape." Duh. But you
Duh.
guys are smart enough to do that. So you've got stuff back how many years? How many different stations?
It's from the 80s and the 90s, the 2000s, and most recently from 2003 to 2025. So in total, we've got well, I'll just round it off. We've got 700 episodes, and you can. So there's all the old stuff. The new stuff is not suitable for work. We'll say that. No episode is longer than 10 minutes. So, it's good for your morning routine, if you know what I mean.
Yes, I do. Yes, I
It's
do.
good for a dog walk. And what people thought was controversial with Jesse and Gene back in the 80s and the 90s, you listen to it now, it's not controversial. It's not lame at all. But you know what? It's really funny. And I think the most popular thing we ever did was something called Wreck a Wedding Wednesday. So if a
Wreck
couple
a
was,
wedding.
yeah, Wreck a Wedding Wednesday. So if a couple was getting married, somebody from the bridal party would fax us the information, and we would phone up either the groom or the bride, usually the bride. And, like we would be from the dress company, and we would say, well, there was a fire, in the store, and part of your gown was burned. But we're figuring out a way to make it good. And would you mind if there was few little black spots on your wedding dress? Or
Go
we
ahead.
would phone from the banquet hall not, saying that we can't make this sort of food, but we can make this sort of food. And I mean, you know, the bride especially, I mean, she's uptight enough. And this is, it really is. And so, they're not even thinking that it's a couple of guys on a morning radio station
No,
calling.
no.
And then we would, who is this? We say it's Jesse and Gene. You're on a Recco Wedding Wednesday. I'm gonna kill you guys.
Yeah.
So what we would do is we would make them a cassette of the phone call, and somebody would pick it up at the radio station, and they would play it on the wedding the following weekend.
Yeah, right.
So it was really good. And we had a lot of other really, really crazy bits. We had a thing called Microwave Meltdown, where we challenged people to put things in the microwave and turn it on. No animals, of course,
Oh,
just
I was just going to say, please keep the pets on the ground. Yeah.
yeah. And, we would be constantly calling Buckingham Palace and trying to get to the Queen. We did get through to Jean Chrétien once, and that was a pretty funny phone call. And, I guess we were known for our phone calls. And as you understand this as a veteran broadcaster, we were really the kings of show prep. I mean, we would spend more time preparing the next day's show than when we were actually on the air. So we would generally finish at 9 o'clock in the morning. We would work till about 12:30 preparing the next day's show. And the phone calls always sounded live, but they never were, and except for one interesting call. And we would edit them down for time and quality. So, so that there wouldn't be blank spots. Now, between 5:30 and 6, Jesse and I did something called the warm-up half hour, and we never prepared. And it was just like whatever happened, happened. So we also had Tony Daniels, who's the voice of the CBC. He reads the book there, as they call it, all the promo announcements on CBC TV.
Mhm.
He was we called him Tony the Cheap Voice Guy, and he would do parody songs for us.
Mm.
So we were going through the news before the show at like 20 after 5 in the morning, and Tony says, I got an idea for a great parody song here. And so that was good. So one of the stories in the news that morning, it was really terrible. This woman, elderly woman, who was sunbathing in her backyard in Florida. She was attacked and got eaten by an alligator. And so what we used to do is we would phone up like local towns, like 7-Elevens, and this phone call was live. We would phone up a 7-Eleven. We hear you're in Bradenton, Florida, or Dunedin, or wherever it was, I forget. And did you hear about the grandmother who got eaten by the alligator? And the guy goes, oh, yeah, the family where that happened, they come in here and they buy their milk and stuff in here. Really, what's their last name? So we got the last name. We went through the information operator when they had information operators. And we actually got the phone number. And so we figured, 5 o'clock in the morning, woman just got eaten by the alligator. The family's not going to be answering the phone. And we were just going to leave a message on a voicemail. So a guy picks up the phone and we says, Jesse and Gene calling from, I guess it was AM 640 at that point. And we said, we understand that a woman there was attacked and eaten by an alligator. And the guy goes, well, yeah. He goes, that's my grandmother. Now we're just going, oh, dear sweet Jesus. We actually have this guy on the phone and we're apologizing profusely and we have no idea what we're doing. And we hung up the phone and we're looking at each other live on the air. It's like 5:45 now. And the phone banks lit up like that. People were just so pissed off that we would actually do a phone call like this. Meantime, Tony, who had no idea what had just transpired in the last 15 minutes, walks into the studio and he has a cart. And for those of you who don't know what a cart is, it looks like a mini cassette and you put it in a machine and it's an audio cart. And so Tony comes in like this and we just said, oh, play whatever you got. So he puts the cart in the machine. And now to further complicate things, the next thing you hear is Grandma got eaten by an alligator down in Florida. And we're just going, oh, we are going to get killed. So the phones lit up. People were really, really pissed. So what we did was we put the pissed off callers on the air, but then our fans started calling up and we had callers having fights on the air, calling the family of the woman who got eaten by the alligator and Tony's grandma got eaten by the alligator story.
I was going to ask you before you told that story. I was going to say when you listen back to all this archival footage that you have, some of it is not appropriate today for various and sundry reasons. I mean, there's political correctness, wokeness, call it whatever you wish. But some of it, did you have to take some of it out and say, yeah, we can't do that anymore?
Never. No,
You
no,
know, it's
not
kind of
us.
like
No,
like turning around and
we were not woke before the word woke was invented, and it got us into a lot of trouble, a lot of complaints to the CRTC, the governing body for broadcasting in Canada. And but no, we were never woke. You know, some of the stuff from like the '80s that we play now, we listen to, we go, "Wow, we could never get away with that." And a lot of the stuff that we've done, you know, in the last couple of years, yeah, it's not woke. And but I mean, we're on a podcast, so there's no government agency saying you can't do it.
no, not yet.
Yeah, not yet. That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like I'm
And
thinking of one song we recorded a couple of years ago. I don't want to say it on your podcast because I don't want you to get in trouble with your sponsor. But it was about single guys at Christmas going looking for strange women. Always good stuff with us.
Ted Woloshyn returns in a moment.
I've had the great fortune to say that I've been associated with one of Toronto's finest names in men's clothing for more than 25 years. Tom's Place. Founded by Tom Mahalick's father in 1958, Tom's Place offers brand name men's apparel at unbeatable prices. But more than that, they boast a long serving, knowledgeable, and friendly staff that can assist you whether you're looking for casual or formal attire. And they have plenty of first class tailors on site. In addition, Tom and his family are well known for their philanthropic work. So if you're looking to deal with great people who can fulfill your clothing desires at outstanding prices, do yourself a favor and visit Tom's Place. They're open weekdays from 11 to 6, Saturdays 10 to 5, and Sundays noon to 5. You'll find Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Or check them out online at toms-place.com. Tom's Place will suit you.
Now back to Ted Woloshyn.
Let's go back to some of the adventures that you had. When I first started working, Peterborough was the second station I worked at. One of the things that they wanted me to do was to read the obits every day, just after the 6 o'clock news or whatever, the obituary said, so-and-so died. It's very common in smaller markets, especially. And I just got hired by the station, and I said, I can't do that. I just can't do that. It's not that I don't have anything against it. It's just not in me, A, and B, you've hired me to be this top 40 rock and roll disc jockey, and I'm kind of slamming on the brakes in the middle of, talking about the Stones and Aerosmith, and now all of a sudden I got to talk about, Mrs. Bradley, who didn't get eaten by an alligator because they don't have them in Peterborough, but she died, and I got to talk about it, and I said, I can't do it. Did you ever have to do that?
Yep, sure did. I had
You
to do it
did?
yep, sure did. I had to do it at CFRA in Ottawa. The main sponsor funeral home was House and Playfair Funeral Homes and Chapels, 432 Kent Street in Ottawa.
Well, it makes sense that it's Ottawa because that's where fun goes to die.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, and I was a jock and I also did news there. And the interest well, we called it rigor mortis roundup to begin with. And so you'd be handed a piece of paper. The funeral home would fax it over. And so you would have it. And so I remember one day, oh, by the way, the first time you read it, everybody from the radio station goes on the other side of the glass and tries to crack you up, which was pretty funny. So I remember I'm doing the newscast, and in small markets back then, and I was just out of university. I didn't really have good judgment. I followed everybody, and if there was a car accident, that would be the lead story. And it'd be like, two people in a head-on collision. Dead is 54-year-old John Smith of Nepean and blah, 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 blah.
Mm.
And then they play the commercials and you go, now here are the announcements for House and Playfair Funeral Homes and Chapels. Mr. John Smith now resting at the House and Playfair Funeral Home and Chapel on Kensington. I'm going, in the back of my mind, I'm going, that was a dude that got killed in the car crash I was just
Yeah.
talking about. So yeah, everybody had to do rigor mortis roundup, and the other one in a small market station that really screwed up guys who were very nervous being on the air was you would give a time check, and the time check was sponsored, and it'd be like, it's officially 1 o'clock. Check your clock with the grandfather clock at Chime Jewelers. It's 1 o'clock. This time check brought to you by Chime Jewelers. Well, I can't tell you the number of guys who screwed that one up. And, check your cock, or rather,
Yeah.
I mean clock,
Yeah. Do you miss being on the radio, and why have you tried to get back on the radio? Do you want to be back on the radio? I mean,
Well, yeah, I'd love to be back on the radio. I left radio after Jesse and I just got fired too much and nobody would hire us as a team.
yeah. I know the
And
feeling.
yeah, and I had a couple of jobs after that, CFRB, where you were,
Yeah.
afternoons, and also the team radio network. And, they canceled that thing. So I started doing other things. But yeah, I'd love to be back on the radio. And I moved to a different industry and lived around the world for a while. And my last radio gig was a friend of mine said that Don Shaver, great Hall of Famer in Canadian broadcasting, he had opened up a station in Vancouver called Roundhouse Radio. And
Right.
a friend of mine in BC said, Don Schaefer's looking for a morning guy. So I called him up and I said, I hear you're looking for a morning guy. And he said, yeah, who can you recommend? I said, me. He said, I can't afford you. I said, let's work something out. So we talked on the phone for 15 minutes and I said, okay, we got a deal. And I was in Ontario at that point in time, sort of in between things. And I said, well, when do you want me to start? And he said, like last week. So literally, I hopped in my car on a Wednesday morning at 5 a.m. and I drove into the city of Vancouver Saturday afternoon. So I literally was driving across Canada, which I recommend to everybody, by the way, like 14 hours a day and getting a couple hours of sleep in tiny motels along the Trans-Canada Highway. And I started on the Monday morning after we had talked on the previous Tuesday. And that was a really great experience. Sadly, the investors in this radio station pulled the plug after, well, it was 3 years. I'd been there just over two. And then Jesse and I reformed our partnership in Vancouver, and I started working at his company.
Because I'm thinking, it's people think that you hit a certain age and you should retire because that's just what it is, the way God planned it. Well, and I don't buy that. I mean, I see people who are older than I'm in my early 70s. I'm 71. I see people older than I am, and they're working not like they're working their ass
Yeah.
off, not because necessarily they
Well,
need to, because they want to, and they want to feel like things are happening. But there's a certain part of this culture of ours that is guilty of ageism, that thinks that once you've hit that 65 number for whatever reason, you got to go away and play golf and plant flowers, and that's all you're good for, which to
my
me is
late
really
my
insane.
late dad my late dad lived till he was 97, and he worked up until he was 94. And
Yeah.
I mean, but you know what, though? He didn't work. He loved what he was doing. So it was never a job. And I've always done things that I love to do. So I don't think that I've really actually worked in my life. But, I left Vancouver at the end of last year and I'm back in Southern Ontario now. And as I always say, like, I'm looking for a new adventure right now. And I'm facing ageism and, it happens. But yeah, I'm looking for a new adventure right now. So if you're watching this, you want to hire me, get hold of Dad.
Well, you know what? I would imagine that you've got so many experiences. You've got, God, I mean, some of the places that you lived in. I want to talk about that for a second. I mean, it's like a guy like you with so much, you've sucked in so much knowledge over the years it's a shame for it to just sit there and not be used.
Yeah, well, I always wanted to be on morning radio. And, after you at Q107, there was Scruff and Gene, and there was Steve Anthony and Gene. There was Brother Jake and Gene. In public affairs, there was Jane Houghton and Gene, and then came
Yeah.
Jesse and Gene. That one really stuck, and we were very successful and were rewarded with very good paychecks. And I mean, that was playing for a living. The thing is, though, as you know, when you do morning radio and you're done at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock in the morning, there's nobody to play with. And
No.
I had been a student of radio and had really followed morning guys all over North America to see what made them tick and click and what made them successful. And one common thing was these guys were day drinkers, and a lot of them died from alcohol related cirrhosis of the liver or passed out, hit their head or whatever.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to be one of those guys. So I started studying with a guy by the name of Bob Proctor. He was in that movie, The Secret, that a lot of people saw a couple of years ago. He passed away about a year and a half ago. And he was one of my big mentors in life. So when radio kind of changed and salaries started going down, he wanted to know, like, he charged a lot of money to go into companies and do trainings. And it wasn't like motivational stuff. It was how your brain works and how to get new and better results in business or your personal life. And he had clients all over the world, but he would charge like 100 grand to go in for a weekend. So when there were clients who couldn't afford that kind of money, he would send me in and I would give him like a talent fee. And that led me to move to Hong Kong for 3 years and live in Hong Kong and teach his material there, the Asian Pacific area of the globe. And that was great. And if it wasn't for SARS, remember SARS? If it
Yeah.
wasn't for SARS, I would still be living in Hong Kong today. I found it to be the cleanest, crime-free, most wonderful city on the planet Earth. If you've never visited Hong Kong, I highly recommend it. It's just an incredible place. Services, I mean, you don't get service anywhere in the world like Hong Kong. I mean, you can eat off the streets. You don't have to speak Mandarin or Cantonese. English is fine there. Everybody learns, a little bit like, so you can say your address in a taxi. But if they don't understand your terrible Mandarin like mine, they just hand you a little speaker thing and the dispatcher tells the driver. But I just love living there. It was just fantastic. And the interesting cultural shift that happened was a guy from St. Louis saw one of my presentations in Hong Kong, and he was opening up a business in Dallas. And we had just returned from Hong Kong because of SARS. And when we got back to Toronto, SARS had broken out, of course. The poor guy at the airport, where are you coming from, Hong Kong? He just turned white. But in any event, this guy got a hold of me and he said, do you want to run my company in Texas? So we moved to Dallas, Texas. And if you want to talk about a culture shift from Hong Kong to living in Dallas,
Yeah, I
that
guess.
it
I
was
guess. Yeah.
interesting. But you know what, though? Dallas is an amazing city, and Texans are the friendliest people in the world. The only interesting thing, and this is a Canadian thing that I had to get used to, was so I'm running this company. It was an art company in the direct selling industry. And my assistant, Marie, I remember because I had to travel a lot because we were an international business. I went around the globe, like Hong Kong, England, parts of Canada, the States, once every 6 weeks. It's got a lot of travel points. But she wasn't really used to booking travel. And I was just kind of, pushing her to stretch her to, learn how to book things without me over her desk telling her, no, do this, do this. Because I think that's how people learn better, give them some freedom to explore. But she was having a little trouble. And I went to her desk and I just helped her out with something. And I said, Marie, I said, you've got a handgun in your purse. And she said, and Texans are very formal. Yes, sir. No, yes, sir. I said, this is the workplace and your gun is like sticking out of your purse. And she goes, Mr. Valaitis. She goes, steps up and she goes, girls, Mr. Valaitis, being Canadian again, let's show him our guns. And every woman in the office, handguns, handguns. So as a Canadian, I can't understand this. And I said to them, well, yeah, I'm from
Mm.
Canada. Most of us don't have handguns. And I said, just explain to me the logic behind that. And they all had the same answer. The bad guys don't know what good guys have guns. And there's one way to find out. So
Yeah,
that
that's
was
another.
that was really interesting experience. I loved living there. I got so overweight it was ridiculous because yeah, everything is bigger in Texas. And I mean, it's like you work late. You don't have time to make dinner, so you stop at the local barbecue place and you get ribs and sausages and sides. And of course, for dessert, peach cobbler, warm peach cobbler with vanilla ice cream. So I moved to California after Texas, and everybody's, we lived right on Pacific Coast Highway, right at the ocean. And, everybody's running and in shape. And I just said, okay, time to get on one of those no carb diets. I
Yeah.
had to, honest to God, I had to lose like about 30 pounds. I
Well,
put
it's
so
not
much.
just the weight. I'm surprised you didn't just your heart and your every vein in your body didn't just explode on you there.
Well, years later, I did have a mild heart attack. So it may have been a barbecue heart attack. Yeah. So I got a couple of stents put in my body. That was interesting.
Did you have what? If I remember correctly, did you have some problems with a carotid artery one time?
Yeah. Jesse and I were recording an episode of our podcast. And if you have a lot of junk in your carotid artery, what happens is sometimes you don't get
That's the
enough.
one by your on your neck here, right?
This little scar there.
Yeah.
9-inch long scar. Yeah, and what happens if you don't get enough blood to your brain? Everything slows down. So we're recording this podcast, and all of a sudden I started right. Now I didn't have the droopy face and all the rest of that, and it only lasted about 10 seconds. But it is on tape somewhere, and it was really scary. Jesse knew about this, and I said, "Oh, that's it. I got to go home." He goes, "No, no, you're not going home. You're going to the hospital." And that's when I found out it's called a TIA, and Jesse was telling me this. He said I had a mini one of these once, so I know what it is. And I was still kind of shocked. And I said, "What's it called again?" He goes, "A TIA." And we're getting closer to the hospital. I go, "What's it called again?" TIA. I said, "Okay, I got to remember that." And Jesse, of course, being Jesse, said, "Just remember this: tits, Indians, and assholes." Yeah, so I had a little operation and they cleaned it all up. Now, the funny story about that operation is because of this minor little heart attack. Like, I didn't have one of those, I'm dying kind of a thing. I just had a little bit of pain in my chest. And I always tell people, men, because men are in denial, if you
Yeah.
have chest pains, go to the hospital because most men don't. And I had read this somewhere that men are in denial. So when I had a little bit of chest pains, I went and they said, "Yeah, you've had a mild heart attack." And the doctor said, "Had you not come in, you probably would have died." So if you have chest pains, men, 911, get to the hospital right away. So I have this thing cleaned out in Vancouver. And because I'm on blood thinners, instead of going to the recovery room after the anesthetic wears off for a half an hour or whatever, I had to stay there overnight, and there was a nurse at my bedside. And, she was like every 20 minutes taking your blood pressure and asking you questions like, "What day is it?" And at one point, after all these questions, I'm like, "It's Tuesday. There's 196 days left in the year. Your name is Jen." And I got kind of funny, but I couldn't fall asleep because she kept answering me questions and waking me up. So I did finally fall asleep, and I woke up and I had the worst pain down by my crotch. And the nurse, she was St. Paul's Hospital in Vancouver is unbelievable. It's like if you're listening from Toronto, St. Paul's in Vancouver is like St. Mike's Hospital in Toronto, just a world class hospital with the best people in the world. And I said, "Jane," I said, my crotch, why do I have pain down there?" She goes, "Well, you have a catheter." I said, I do? She goes, "Well, of course you do. You were knocked out for 2 hours for an operation. You're lying in bed. It's not like you can jump up and go to the wall." And I said, "Well, why is it hurting so much?" So she pulls the covers back and she goes, "Oh my God, you've got an erection." I said, "An erection?" She goes, "Yeah, you had all this crap taken out of your neck. Your blood is flowing beautifully. That's why.
Jeez.
Remember when you were 19?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "But it hurts." And she said, "You got to get rid of it." "How?" She said, "Think about Margaret Thatcher. Picture Margaret
What?
Thatcher." So I go, "Margaret Thatcher, Margaret Thatcher, Margaret Thatcher." And
Boy, jeez.
hello.
Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady, is spinning right now in her mausoleum because somebody's talking badly about her.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, thank you, Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah, no kidding. What a jeez. I remember when we worked at Q107. I just needed to share this story because it's one of those silly stories that I love so much. We were up in the 30th floor at Yonge and Bloor, right in the heart of the city of Toronto, and we had this thing called Club 30. You remember Club 30?
Sure do
Club
remember Club
30
30.
was the stairwell on the 30th floor.
The
So
firewall,
what we used to
the fire escape.
well, I guess it was a fire escape. It was just the stairwell, right? Nobody, everybody took an elevator for the most part, but anyway, so the staff would gather there in the stairwell, and we would smoke joints.
Yeah,
But we got a little brazen after a while. It wasn't enough that we were smoking a joint because the walls are all concrete, and it is your concrete cracks has got little holes and little valleys, and we would just put our little roaches in there. We would just roach it, and you put it in there. So the next day comes, you want to smoke a joint, and you haven't got any pot on you. You go and you pull the roach out of the wall, and you smoke it out of your wall. Not a very sanitary thing at all. And then we got to a point where we were just like a little bit too pushy and
yeah.
started hanging like Aerosmith posters and Rush posters and things like that, to the point where the building proprietor went to Alan Slate, the owner of the radio station, and threatened to throw the station out on the street unless these people stopped smoking pot, because there was enough people in there at times when somebody would just walk by and go, "This smells like marijuana," and just starts more smoking pot and putting it in the
Because
walls.
it was
This and after.
marijuana.
Hey, do you remember the memo from Alan?
Yeah. No, the memo was from Gary Slade.
Or from
But
Gary, that's right.
Alan freaked out and told Gary that he had to take care of this. And Gary issued a memo about the smell, the toxic smell coming from the staircase, and it had to stop because they were going to kick us out of the Hudson Bay Tower at Young and Bloor's.
Yeah,
So then people just started smoking in the studio.
that's right. That's right. I remember
A
one
lot of
time.
weird things. A lot of weird things happen in radio stations, and I can tell you a favorite story. We were again AM 640, where the alligator thing happened, and one of the program directors left, and we got a new program director. His name was Pat Cardinal. The poor guy has since passed away. Let's just say Pat Cardinal didn't like us a lot. And he inherited us. And, Pat's claim to fame was firing us and hiring Howard Stern. And he fired us because he said we couldn't take direction. And I think we know all about Howard Stern. In any event, the studio was at Young and Shepherd, right around the corner from Jesse and Gene Way, by the way. Mel Lastman named a little street after us. It's still there.
Very nice.
And it had an outdoor patio. So Pat was hired in like January, something like that. And it became evident that he didn't like us, like right away. And we drank a lot of coffee. So one morning we're out on the patio and Pat's window to his office was down on the next floor. So Jesse went over the fence and I hung on to him for dear life. And he peed all over the window, Pat's window. We thought this was funny because it froze right away. So now what we started doing was at about 7:00 every morning, Jesse, who drank like a thermos full of coffee, we would go out on the deck in the freezing cold weather. I'd hang on to him. He would go, like, literally could have fallen to his death and would pee on Pat Cardinal's window. And we did this for like about 3 weeks. So for people who don't know broadcasting, an air check is your show. And this machine records what you say. When you turn off the mic, it stops recording. So you don't listen to all the music and everything. And I remember we had to sit down with Pat and do an air check. So he's at his desk with the window behind him. And we're looking at Pat and like we're trying to ignore this window, which is now a grayish, yellowish tone with about this much of ice on the window.
Yeah.
And I remember at one point, Pat said, boy, he goes, I just came from Edmonton. He goes, look at that window. He goes, I can't believe the pollution here in Toronto.
Jesus.
So he literally had about 4 inches of frozen pee on his window for about 2.5 months until spring came around.
And he never found out about it?
Oh, he did later on, yeah.
No. After he let you go.
Yeah, actually, he changed a lot. He evolved a lot, and he apologized for treating us poorly, and we told him the story, and he actually thought it was very funny.
Well, if there's anybody who's looking out there, Gene wants to do some more work. He's getting bored sitting at home by himself. So if you're looking for a window washer with a different twist, just go to his website and you can get more information.
Yeah, we did a lot of stuff.
Is the Gene and Jesse podcast available now? Can people just go and dig it out whenever they want?
Yeah, you just go to Apple Podcasts and you can listen to it there. We also just launched an app. The app doesn't have all 700 episodes on it, but you can get the Jesse and Gene app at the Google Play Store and the, where you get your apps on the Apple App Store. Or if you just want to listen to them at home, yeah, on Apple Podcasts. Yeah.
That's great stuff. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you. We'll have to do it again. It's been way too long since we last did this. Listen, good luck. Repeat Champions Foundation. Check it out. For those of you who would like to assist, if maybe perhaps there's a company that would like to sponsor, or if you want to just make a donation, or if you're a charitable organization and you're looking for trophies for your kids' soccer team or your hockey team or whatever it may be, check that out. Check out the Gene and Jesse podcast and contact Gene if you're looking for somebody who's a lot of fun to work with. I know I had a lot of fun working with you.
Yeah.
I wish you nothing but the best, my man.
Thank you, Ted. Great talking to you. I've really enjoyed this.
Okay. All right, you take care. That'll do it for another edition of the Ted Woloshyn podcast. Go to our website, tedwoloshyn.ca. Check out our past episodes. You can leave your comments and questions as well. And remember, we're on YouTube. If you're not watching on YouTube, you can. And you can subscribe as well. It costs you a penny. Also, when you're online, don't forget to fill out your organ and tissue donation card. You could change or even save a life. In the meantime, have a great week.
The Ted Woloshyn podcast has been brought to you by Tom's Place. For the finest in men's clothing at unbeatable prices, it's Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. And ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. Technical production by Paul Gatt. Music by Bike Thieves. For more on this podcast and our sponsors, and to talk to Ted, go to www.tedwoloshyn.ca.